Memento Mori, chapter OneThe telephone rang. She lifted the receiver. As she had feared, the man spoke before she could say a word. When he had spoken the familiar sentence, she said, "Who is that speaking? Who is it?" But the voice, as on 8 previous occasions, had rung off. Dame Lettie telephoned to the assistant inspector as she had been requested to do. "It has occurred again," she said. "I see. Did you notice the time? It was only a moment ago." "The same thing?" "Yes," she said, "the same." "Surely you have some means of tracing?" "Yes, Dame Lettie, we will get him, of course." A few moments later Dame Lettie telephoned to her brother Godfrey. "Godfrey, it has happened again. I'll come and fetch you, Lettie," he said. "You must spend the night with us." "Nonsense. There is no danger. It is merely a disturbance." "What did he say?" "The same thing. And quite matter of fact, not really threatening." "Of course the man's mad. I don't know what the police are thinking of. They must be sleeping. It's been going on for 6 weeks now. Just those words, just the same words. Remember, you must die, nothing more. He must be a maniac," said Godfrey. Godfrey's wife Charmian sat with her eyes closed, attempting to put her thoughts into alphabetical order, which Godfrey had told her was better than no order at all, since she now had grasp of neither logic nor chronology. Charmian was 85. The other day a journalist from a weekly paper had been to see her. Godfrey had subsequently read aloud to her the young man's article. By the fire sat a frail old lady, a lady who once set the whole of the literary world, if not the Thames, on fire. Despite her age, this legendary figure is still abundantly alive. Charmian felt herself dropping off, and so she said to the maid who was arranging the magazines on the long oak table by the window, "Taylor, I am dropping off to sleep for 5 minutes. Telephone to St. Mark's and say I am coming." Just at that moment Godfrey entered the room holding his hat and wearing his outdoor coat. "What's that you say?" he said. "Oh, Godfrey, you made me start." "Taylor," he repeated, "St. Mark's. Don't you realize there is no maid in this room? And furthermore, you are not in Venice. Come and get warm by the fire," she said, "and take your coat off," for she thought he had just come in from the street. "I am about to go out," he said. "I am going to fetch Lettie, who is to stop with us tonight. She has been troubled by another of those anonymous calls." "That was a pleasant young man who called the other day," said Charmian. "Which young man?" "From the paper. The one who wrote." "That was 5 years and 2 months ago," said Godfrey. "Why can't one be kind to her?" he asked himself as he drove to Lettie's house in Hampstead. "Why can't one be more gentle?" He himself was 87, and in charge of all his faculties. Whenever he considered his own behavior, he thought of himself not as a, but as one. One has one's difficulties with Charmian, he told himself. "Nonsense," said Lettie. "I have no enemies." "Think," said Godfrey. "Think hard." "The red lights," said Lettie. "And don't talk to me as if I were Charmian." "Lettie, if you please, I do not need to be told how to drive. I observed the lights." He had braked hard, and Dame Lettie was jerked forward. She gave a meaningful sigh which, when the green lights came on, made him drive all the faster. "You know, Godfrey," she said, "you are wonderful for your age. So everyone says." His driving pace became moderate. Her sigh of relief was inaudible. Her patting herself on the back, invisible. "In your position," he said, "you must have enemies." "Nonsense. I say yes." He accelerated. "Well, perhaps you're right." He slowed down again, but Dame Lettie thought, "I wish I hadn't come." They were at Knightsbridge. It was only a matter of keeping him happy till they reached Kensington Church Street, and turned into Vicarage Gardens where Godfrey and Charmian lived. "I have written to Eric," she said, "about his book. Of course, he has something of his mother's former brilliance, but it did seem to me that the subject matter lacked the joy and hope which was the mark of a good novel in those days. I couldn't read the book," said Godfrey. "I simply could not go on with it. A motor salesman in Leeds and his wife spending a night in a hotel with that communist librarian. Where does it all lead you?" Eric was his son. Eric was 56 and had recently published his second novel. "He'll never do as well as Charmian did," Godfrey said, "try as he may." "Well, I can't quite agree with that," said Lettie, seeing that they had now pulled up in front of the house. "Eric has a hard streak of realism which Charmian never." Godfrey had got out and slammed the door. Dame Lettie sighed and followed him into the house, wishing she hadn't come. "Did you have a nice evening at the pictures, Taylor?" said Charmian. "I am not Taylor," said Dame Lettie, "and in any case, you always called Taylor Geen during her last 20 or so years in your service. Mrs. Anthony, their daily housekeeper, brought in the milky coffee and placed it on the breakfast table. "Did you have a nice evening at the pictures, Taylor?" Charmian asked her. "Yes, thanks, Mrs. Colston," said the housekeeper. "Mrs. Anthony is not Taylor," said Lettie. "There is no one by name of Taylor here. And anyway, you used to call her Jean Latterly. It was only when you were a girl that you called Taylor Taylor." And, in any event, Mrs. Anthony is not Taylor. Godfrey came in. He kissed Charmian. She said, "Good morning, Eric." "He is not Eric," said Dame Lettie. Godfrey frowned at his sister. Her resemblance to himself irritated him. He opened the Times. "Are there lots of obituaries today?" said Charmian. "Oh, don't be gruesome," said Lettie. "Would you like me to read you the obituaries, dear?" Godfrey said, turning the pages to find the place in defiance of his sister. "Well, I should like the war news," Charmian said. "The war has been over since 1945, Dame Lettie said. "If indeed it is the last war you are referring to. Perhaps, however, you mean the First World War? The Crimean perhaps." "Lettie, please," said Godfrey. He noticed that Lettie's hand was unsteady as she raised her cup, and the twitch on her large left cheek was pronounced. He thought in how much better form he himself was than his sister, though she was the younger, only 79. Mrs. Anthony looked round the door. "Someone on the phone for Dame Lettie." "Oh, who is it?" "Wouldn't give a name." "Ask who it is, please." "Did ask." "Wouldn't give." "I'll go," said Godfrey. Dame Lettie followed him to the telephone and overheard the male voice. "Tell Dame Lettie," it said, "to remember she must die." "Who's there?" said Godfrey. But the man had hung up. "We must have been followed," said Lettie. "I told no one I was coming over here last night." She telephoned to report the occurrence to the assistant inspector. He said, "Sure you didn't mention to anyone that you intended to stay at your brother's home?" "Of course I'm sure. Your brother actually heard the voice." "Heard it himself?" "Yes, as I say, he took the call." She told Godfrey, "I'm glad you took the call. It corroborates my story. I have just realized that the police have been doubting it." "Doubting your word?" "Well, I suppose they thought I might have imagined it. Now, perhaps, they will be more active." Charmian said, "The police? What are you saying about the police? Have we been robbed?" "I am being molested," said Dame Lettie. Mrs. Anthony came in to clear the table. "Ah, Taylor, how old are you?" said Charmian. 69, Mrs. Colston, said Mrs. Anthony. "When will you be 70? 28th November. That will be splendid, Taylor. You will then be one of us," said Charmian. Memento Mori by Muriel Spark, with an introduction by Zoë Strachan. Polygon, 222 pp. £9.99.